This was the terrifying moment a driver realized he was about to be carjacked. He turns down a narrow street at night and is immediately met by a group of men waving weapons that look like machetes. But instead of backing out, he moves forward, only to realize the road has been deliberately blocked. Two large tanker trucks are positioned on the street, and a fallen tree is laid out between them, leaving almost no way through. Within seconds, the men rush the car and start smashing the windows, trying to force their way inside. The driver panics but stays moving, squeezing the car through a tight gap along the side of the road, barely clearing the obstacles as the attackers were closing in. He manages to break past them and speed off before they can get the doors open. Incidents like this are a known tactic across parts of the world where organized roadside robberies happen frequently, with criminals blocking roads to trap drivers before surrounding the vehicle. It's not clear where this particular clip took place, but the setup matches methods that have been commonly reported across the globe. I got nothing else to say. What are you still doing here? Get out of here. Just recently, Ed Sheeran revealed he'd been dealing with shingles for about a month, a painful viral infection caused by the reactivation of the chickenpox virus. The outbreak affected his scalp, causing burning nerve pain and blistering rashes severe enough that he shaved his head to manage it. Shingles attacks nerve pathways in the skin, and when it spreads across the scalp, even light contact can cause intense burning. Hair can trap heat, irritate the lesions, and make treatment difficult, so shaving it off helps reduce constant pain and allows medication to be applied directly. While not usually fatal, shingles can leave lasting nerve damage, with some people experiencing chronic pain long after the rash disappears. In Istanbul, Ali Sifsi suffered a catastrophic head injury while confronting a burglar, leaving a large section of his skull fractured and missing, with parts of his brain left dangerously exposed. Emergency surgery stabilized him, but a huge portion of his skull could not be saved. To rebuild it, surgeons performed detailed scans of his remaining skull and designed a patient-specific implant, 3D printing a curved titanium plate to precisely replace the missing bone. During reconstruction, the metal implant was secured directly to his skull, effectively acting as a permanent substitute for the lost bone, protecting his brain while permanently altering the structure of his head. In June of 2023, in the North Atlantic Ocean near the Titanic wreck site, Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Sulman were among those killed when the Titan submersible suddenly imploded. Nearly 9 months later, after recovery efforts at extreme depths, small amounts of human remains were returned to the family. Identified through DNA testing, the material was described by Shahzada's wife as the slush that was left delivered in 2 small shoe boxes. Due to the conditions of the implosion and the environment, the remains were limited and heavily fragmented, with some of the recovered material being mixed together, meaning it could not be definitively attributed to one specific individual. In Rochester, New York in 2022, a woman installed a hidden trail cam at her mother's grave after noticing it kept being disturbed. The footage soon captured her father, the woman's ex-husband, returning to the cemetery and urinating directly on the grave multiple times per week. The behavior had been going on for at least several months, and likely closer to a year or more before it was caught on camera. In multiple clips, his partner could be seen waiting nearby in a car while he carried out the act. Police were contacted, but the case fell into a gray area legally, with any charges depending on local cemetery regulation. The situation drew attention for the sustained, deliberate nature of the acts, targeting the grave long after the relationship had ended. In April of 2026, at a Spada Park in San Antonio, 24-year-old Atharva Vyas randomly attacked a woman and her 3-year-old daughter. Witnesses said he grabbed the mother by the hair and threw her to the ground, forcing her to drop the child. He then grabbed the toddler and began biting directly into her face, causing severe trauma and knocking out multiple teeth as she screamed in horror. The attack only stopped when a bystander intervened and managed to restrain him until police arrived. The child was rushed to the hospital in total shock, suffering serious facial injuries and lasting psychological trauma. Vyas was arrested at the scene and is facing multiple felony charges, including injury to a child. According to the Department of Homeland Security, he was in the United States illegally after his visa was revoked, and ICE has placed a detainer on him. As of now, the motive remains unclear, and the case is ongoing as the child continues recovery. This was the moment a birthday party Spider-Man nearly died within seconds. He dives into the pool in full costume, but when he comes up, the mask is completely soaked and suctioned to his face. He quickly starts panicking and trying to breathe, while the kids think it's part of the act and continue splashing him. He gets out pretty quickly, but continues struggling to breathe since he can't free his face. He essentially waterboarded himself since the mask had trapped the water, making it impossible to breathe. Luckily, a few adults recognized what was happening and helped him pull the mask off before he suffocated. Here's a creepy clip of a dog making biting motions at its owner whenever she turns her back. Each time she turns away, the dog stiffens, locks onto her, and snaps at the air. According to vets online, this isn't playful behavior, but hesitation mixed with fear or low-level aggression. Dogs are more likely to test boundaries if they don't feel watched, especially if they're anxious or unsure. It's essentially a dog working up to a bite without fully committing, and trainers say a behavior like this can escalate if it isn't addressed early on. In Philadelphia, Tammy Terrell began suffering severe migraines as a child after reportedly being assaulted at age 11. By 17, she was in a relationship with 30-year-old James Brown, who she later claimed physically abused her. In her early 20s, she became involved with David Ruffin, who she also described as violent, with accounts claiming he once struck her in the head with a motorcycle helmet. As her career with Marvin Gaye was taking off, she collapsed on stage in 1967, later diagnosed with a brain tumor. Over the next few years, she underwent multiple surgeries as the tumor kept returning. In March of 1970, at just 24 years old, she died after a long decline, with speculation that repeated head trauma may have contributed to or worsened her condition. This was the final footage of Chiara Giaconis just moments before she'd be tragically killed. In 2024 in Naples, Italy, 30-year-old Prada manager Chiara Giaconis was on what was supposed to be a dream birthday trip with her boyfriend when she was walking through a narrow street in the historic center. As they passed beneath an apartment balcony, a decorative stone statuette was suddenly thrown from above, striking her in the head with enough force to cause catastrophic injuries. She would end up tragically dying from the impact. Investigators determined the object had been thrown by a 13-year-old boy inside the apartment, who had reportedly been tossing several items from the balcony beforehand. But because he was under 14, he could not be criminally charged under Italian law, even though his actions led directly to her death. Prosecutors instead charged the boy's parents with manslaughter, arguing that the death was completely preventable and that they failed to properly supervise him. Parents have denied any wrongdoing, maintaining they couldn't have possibly anticipated what happened. As the case continues, the focus remains on whether their level of supervision meets the threshold for criminal responsibility in a situation where a single impulsive act turned fatal within seconds. Daryl Sheets, known as the Gambler from Storage Wars, was found dead on April 22, 2026 inside his Arizona home at age 67. Police responded around 2 a.m. to reports of a deceased individual and discovered his body after he had apparently turned the gun on himself. He was pronounced dead at the scene and the case remains under investigation. In the days leading up to his death, at least one former co-star claimed he'd been dealing with severe online harassment, and authorities are reportedly looking into possible cyberbullying as a contributing factor. His death came after years of serious health issues, including a massive heart attack in 2019 and ongoing heart complications that forced him to step away from television. Sheets had been one of the most recognizable figures on the show, appearing in over 160 episodes, and once even claimed he unknowingly bought a storage unit that contained a plastic-wrapped human body tied to a murder case. After leaving TV, he lived in Arizona running an antique shop largely out of the spotlight until his death. Lance Armstrong built one of the most inspiring comeback stories in sports after surviving advanced testicular cancer and winning 7 straight Tour de France titles from 1999 to 2005. But behind the scenes, he was running a coordinated doping program involving performance-enhancing drugs and blood transfusions, while aggressively denying accusations and discrediting anyone who spoke out. In 2012, the United States Anti-Doping Agency exposed the scheme, calling it one of the most sophisticated doping operations in sports history. Armstrong was eventually stripped of all 7 titles and banned for life. Sponsors dropped him, his reputation collapsed, and in 2013 he admitted the truth in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, turning a cancer survival legacy into one of the most infamous falls from grace in sports. In 2003 in Rafah, British filmmaker James Miller was shot and killed while filming the documentary Death in Gaza. On his final night, he and his crew left a damaged home wearing TV-marked gear, waving a white flag and identifying themselves as journalists as Israeli forces sat roughly 100 meters away. A warning shot was fired but missed. Then seconds later, a second round struck Miller in the neck from the front, killing him. An autopsy confirmed the trajectory and linked the bullet to Israeli-issued ammo, contradicting claims of Palestinian fire. fire. The Israeli military closed the case with no charges, citing insufficient evidence, despite later findings suggesting clear visibility. A UK court pointed to evidence of intentional killing, but no prosecution followed. The case was officially closed in 2009 after compensation was paid to his family. Steve Irwin spent his entire life working hands-on with animals that could kill him, and he openly said that if he ever died, it would likely be from wildlife. Throughout his career, he was constantly bitten, cut, and injured by snakes, lizards, and crocodiles. There were multiple close calls where crocodiles snapped inches from his body. He regularly handled some of the most venomous snakes in the world in remote areas, where a single bite could have easily been fatal before help arrived. This was one of the last photos ever taken of Steve off the coast of Queensland in 2006 before a stingray struck him with its tail, sending a barb through his chest and directly into his heart. Fatal stingray injuries like this are extremely rare, with fewer than 20 documented deaths worldwide since the 1950s. The barb was quickly pulled out during the emergency, which likely accelerated the bleeding, but the damage to his heart was already catastrophic either way. The moment was caught on camera, and the footage was reportedly destroyed before it was ever released. According to those present, his final words were reportedly, "I'm dying," before he went into cardiac arrest. The stingray is believed to have acted defensively as Steve approached from above. Despite decades of surviving encounters with some of the most dangerous animals on Earth, Steve died from a single rare defensive strike, the exact kind of risk he had always accepted. In 2018, a man from Rhode Island returned from his vacation in Costa Rica with severe migraines and facial paralysis, initially thought to be a brain tumor. But instead, doctors discovered a rare black mold growing inside his brain, forming dangerous abscesses. The fungus, found in soil, is known for attacking the brain and carries a mortality rate of around 70%, with early cases historically being almost always fatal. Since 1911, only about 120 cases have ever been recorded worldwide. The infection likely entered his body during the trip and slowly spread to his brain, causing several strokes and neurological damage. Because of its location deep in the brain, the mold couldn't be fully removed, but after extensive treatment, the man miraculously managed to survive. In April of 2011, French aristocrat Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès killed his wife, 4 children, and the family's 2 dogs inside their home in Nantes using a .22 caliber rifle while they slept. Investigators later found the victims wrapped in plastic and buried beneath the terrace, alongside religious items and letters suggesting he had carefully planned the murders before withdrawing money, abandoning his car in southern France, and vanishing without a confirmed trace. Despite an international manhunt, sightings, and several false leads over the years, he's never been located, leaving the case one of France's most disturbing unsolved family murder mysteries, with authorities still uncertain whether he escaped abroad, lives under a false identity, or died shortly after disappearing. During a live Argentine league match between Estudiantes and Vélez Sarsfield, a green laser was repeatedly pointed at the goalkeeper while play was ongoing, briefly disrupting him during key moments. But broadcast cameras tracked the source in the stands and sniped the fan in real time, still holding the laser pointer before she realized she was on the big screen. She was later identified as Delfina Quiroga, a die-hard Estudiantes fan from La Plata. Argentine media reported that her father is a local prosecutor, and despite the visibility of the incident, she was not criminally charged. However, authorities in the club are expected to issue a stadium ban that could last up to 2 years, since using laser pointers during matches is considered a safety violation and interference with play. In 1980 in Florida, 19-year-old Mark DeFries was arrested for taking his deceased father's tools from a school workshop. He was initially sentenced to 4 years, but spent over 30 years in prison after repeatedly escaping. An autistic savant, DeFries became known for building tools from basic scraps, picking locks, and even climbing razor wire fences. Each escape added more time, while prison officials punished him with extreme isolation, totaling an estimated 10,000 plus hours in solitary confinement. Despite being nonviolent, his sentence kept growing until he was finally released on parole in 2019. Gabriela Martins Santos de Moura was a 31-year-old well-being influencer from Brazil who'd spent years trying to get pregnant with her husband. In February of 2026, she went to a human reproduction clinic in Sao Paulo to undergo an assisted fertility procedure as part of that effort. But during the treatment, she suddenly suffered cardiorespiratory arrest at the clinic. She was rushed to a hospital and placed on life support in intensive care. Her doctors fought to stabilize her for 8 days before confirming brain death. The exact complication that caused the cardiac arrest has not been publicly disclosed. The tragedy came just 1 day after she and her husband had celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary. After her death, her family announced they would donate her organ to give others the chance to live. In the summer of 1983, 53-year-old Silvano from a noble Venetian family died in Bologna, Italy, after developing one of the strangest and most terrifying inherited diseases ever documented, fatal familial insomnia. The illness began in middle age and slowly destroyed the part of his brain responsible for sleep, until Silvano gradually lost the ability to sleep at all. Days turned into weeks without rest as his body deteriorated, his brain slipping into delusions and hallucinations as doctors watched helplessly. The disease literally ate away at his brain tissue, and within a few months, the total absence of sleep led to organ failure and death. This was the moment drivers on a highway in San Antonio, Texas, realized something was seriously wrong with the man behind a drifting SUV. Recognizing a medical emergency, 29-year-old Rene Valerio Albi pulled his truck in front of the SUV and gradually slowed down, allowing the runaway vehicle to bump into his bumper until both eventually came to a stop. The driver had suffered a heart attack, and a nurse who stopped at the scene began administering CPR, helping to revive him until paramedics arrived. Doctors said he's expected to make a full recovery thanks to the quick actions of a few strangers. Here's an insane clip of a man narrowly avoiding a horrific death by elevator. Commenters pointed out that he's lucky enough he didn't get crushed, but he also could have easily fallen down the shaft once the elevator moved. Here's a horrifying scene as tourists desperately flee an erupting Mount Etna in Sicily as thick plumes of ash and smoke rise behind them. Mount Etna is Europe's most active volcano and one of the most active in the world, erupting frequently as magma constantly pushes toward the surface beneath the mountain. Despite its constant activity, most eruptions involve slow-moving ash plumes that give people enough time to evacuate. Deaths from this volcano are extremely rare in modern times, though hikers and tourists have occasionally been injured after getting too close to active craters. In 2006, the burned remains of an unidentified young woman were found along a Texas roadside, leaving her known only as Lavender Doe for years because of the purple clothing she was wearing. The case sat cold for years until an amateur sleuth began comparing online Jane Doe files and helped spark renewed attention that led to advanced DNA testing. In 2019, she was finally identified as Dana Lynn Todd, restoring her name after 13 years. In 2023, Joseph Burnett pleaded guilty to her murder and was sentenced to life in prison. 14-year-old Mexican girl Paloma Nicole Arellano died after undergoing cosmetic surgery that reportedly included breast augmentation and a Brazilian butt lift at a private clinic allegedly run by her mother's boyfriend. Authorities said she suffered severe complications following the procedure and was placed in a medically induced coma but died a few days later. Prosecutors later confirmed that the man accused of performing the procedure was arrested and charged in connection with her death, including allegations tied to practicing medicine without proper authorization. In Osaka, Japan, 23-year-old cosplayer Saki Sato was arrested after police say she cut off part of her 21-year-old boyfriend's ring finger with a hatchet and stored it inside the refrigerator. Authorities allege she had previously cut off his left nipple with scissors and exerted extreme control over his finances and phone. The victim himself eventually contacted police, leading officers to discover the preserved finger. Sato denied intentionally mutilating him, claiming he hurt himself, but prosecutors charged her with multiple counts of assault. If convicted, she faces significant prison time under Japan's criminal injury statutes. In August of 2010, dismissed Filipino officer Rolando Mendoza hijacked a tour bus carrying Hong Kong visitors in Manila, demanding his job be reinstated after corruption charges. The standoff dragged on for nearly 11 hours and was broadcast live, with negotiations collapsing after Mendoza's brother, who was trying to mediate, was arrested by authorities. As tensions escalated, Mendoza opened fire on the hostages, while police launched a chaotic rescue attempt that drew heavy criticism for poor coordination. The crisis ended when a police sniper finally killed Mendoza, but 8 tourists were dead and several others injured, sparking diplomatic fallout between Hong Kong and the Philippines. In 2008, Vince Lee boarded a Greyhound bus in Manitoba, Canada, moved seats after a stop, and sat beside 22-year-old Tim McLean, who was asleep against a window with his headphones on. Lee suddenly attacked him with a large knife, stabbing him more than 60 times in the neck, chest, and shoulders, as passengers heard blood-curdling screams and fled the bus in horror. The situation turned into an hours-long standoff, while police waited outside and terrified witnesses watched from a distance. During that time, Lee decapitated McLean, held up his severed head by the hair, and displayed it through the bus window to those outside like a trophy. He then returned to the body, severed other parts, mutilated it further, and consumed portions of McLean's flesh, including reportedly eating his eyes and part of his heart while blood dripped everywhere. Later on, McLean's ear, nose, and tongue were found in Lee's pocket. He was eventually taken into custody and later found not criminally responsible due to untreated schizophrenia. He spent years in a psychiatric facility and was released under supervision, making it one of the most infamous and controversial cases in the history of Canada. Here's a photo of Daniel Pearl during his captivity in 2002, after the Wall Street Journal reporter was kidnapped in Pakistan while investigating extremist networks. Pearl was held by militants linked to Al-Qaeda, and investigators later concluded he was murdered by Khalil Sheikh Mohammed, the architect of the 9/11 attacks. After weeks in captivity, a video surfaced showing Pearl forced to read statements on camera before he was beheaded, with the footage circulating online as extremist propaganda. The killing drew worldwide outrage, not only for its brutality, but because Pearl had been abducted while simply pursuing a journalism assignment. Here's a body cam still of Tiffany Taylor speaking with police after she escaped an encounter with New Jersey serial killer Khalil Wheeler Weaver in 2016. Taylor told officers that he targeted black sex workers because he believed their disappearances would draw less attention, but her report was not fully acted on at the time. Prosecutors later said Wheeler Weaver continued killing, targeting vulnerable women he met online. Frustrated by the lack of progress, friends of one victim carried out their own social media investigation, eventually helping link him to multiple cases. The information ultimately contributed to his arrest, and he was later convicted of several murders and sentenced to life in prison. In 2015, 25-year-old Mina El Houari traveled all the way from France to Fez, Morocco, to meet an online boyfriend she'd been speaking to for months, booking herself into a luxury hotel before their first date. When they got together in the evening, Mina suddenly collapsed, slipping into what was later determined to be an undiagnosed diabetic coma. But instead of calling for medical help, the man panicked and assumed she was dead. He drove her to his home, dug a shallow grave in his backyard, and buried her alive while she was still breathing. Mina slowly suffocated underground, never regaining consciousness. When her family lost contact with her, they filed a missing persons report and flew to Morocco to search. Police questioning led them to the man's home, where muddy clothing and a shovel exposed the crime scene. He later confessed and was charged with involuntary manslaughter, turning a young woman's hopeful search for love into a real-life nightmare. Daisy Coleman grew up in a family marked by repeated tragedy. In 2009, her father was killed when their car slipped on black ice and plunged into a ravine in Missouri. In 2012, at age 14, Daisy was sexually assaulted while incapacitated and left outside her home in freezing temperatures. Despite hospital records documenting injuries and extreme intoxication, the charges were later dropped, and she was publicly discredited, triggering years of vicious harassment. In 2013, the family's home burned down under mysterious circumstances, and in 2018, Daisy's younger brother Tristan died in a car crash, mirroring their father's death. By 2020, Daisy was struggling with severe PTSD, harassment, a reported stalker, and learning she couldn't have children, a condition doctors said may have been linked to the assault. Under the weight of it all, she took her own life that August at the young age of 23. 4 months later, her mother Melinda also died by suicide. Daisy's story was documented in Audrey and Daisy, released while she was still trying to rebuild her life.